Mankind's been trying to kill each other off since the beginning of time. Now, we finally have the power to finish the job.
We're supposed to make the world a better place. What happened?
You've changed things. Forever. There's no going back.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
The world will look up and shout, "Save us." Nor whisper, "No."
I am too far into Gnosticism to back out. The idea of Jesus opening Adam's eye and bringing him to consciousness, the relinking to the lost primordial state through the Gnosis, the unflinching facing of evil in the world and knowing it cannot have come from the good God, and the Salvador Salvandus, man is cut off from part of the Godhead. That was Philip K. Dick from his encompassing scripture known as the Exegesis. I can't think of a better quote on this July 28th, the year of our demiurge 2012. Since our topic deals with Gnostic themes in rock music and graphic novels.
You are a stench in the nostrils of God! The devil has you now!
We also have two astral guests, who besides Fantas happen to be friends. These are Scott Finch, author-illustrator of A Little World Made Cunningly, and Errol Icsel, founding member of the band Sylvia Bliss. And it's a great quote, and we have two guests because Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio is celebrating its 6th anniversary.
Everything you touch turns to suck. It's official.
They say the podcast is dead, and I'm sure one of the reasons is this very show. But we soldier on in the desert of the real, another cycle of iconoclasm at the virtual Alexandria. In other words, wake up and smell the Prozac, because it's raining Gnosis hallelujah.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome so much with kindness and love to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, an initiation by conversation into the dark corners of myth, magic, and meaning. A crash course in cult, culture, and conspiracy. A virtuous virus invoking and informing history, holiness, and heresy. Each week your psychopomp and psycho-killer, Miguel Connor, is allowed to commandeer your connection to bring the most accepted and rejected scholars and provocateurs to your attention.
But isn't that what being an international man of mystery is all about?
Fun, compelling, and deeply weird. This is the blow-your-mind cocktail party conversation you always wanted to listen in on. Certainly the one your wall-building parents, religious czars, political sahibs, and shower-loving coaches were always afraid you might run into, and begin the greatest adventure of all. Finding out who you really are and what reality is not at all.
I know we're all afraid. But my father told me, someday, someone was going to have to take a stand. Someday, someone was going to have to say enough. This could be that day.
You have arrived too, as the Gospel of Tommy says, to be disturbed when you find the meaning of the mystic blog post of the reason of the divine you subscribe to long before you were tied to the body of a dying mammal, but lost in the spam of Jehovah's hosting programs. And then, as the Gospel of Tommy continues, you will be amazed, like Anne Hathaway for the first time outsmarting her breath, when you begin not tasting death of any kind. Welcome to the machine and the means to escape it.
I'm going to show you a world without sin.
Or to summarize my drivel, we're here to write our own gospels and live our own myth. Your mileage may vary. As my friend Haymarket likes to say, whatever works for you, just make sure it works. And agreeing with him and dovetailing nicely on this week's themes, I will quote the great Gnostic rabble-rouser William Blake, who said, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create."
If we live our lives the right way, then every single thing we do becomes a work of art.
Or Errol Bloom, who very wisely said, the central dictum of the Gnostics was and always will be, that which can be broken must be. And all of this and so much more indicates that we are the Gnostics, the lovers of the esoterica and the Dionysian freethinkers. We are the lords of deconstruction, the revenge of the myth on our oppressors, and the word made on flesh. We are the champion eternal, the killing joke, and the pompatus of Gnosis. We are the greatest nightmare of orthodoxy, knighted in the fields of the true seeker warrior by the trinity of Hagia Sophia, Bill Hicks, and Snake Plissken. Divided we stand, together we rise, raging against heaven for our misplaced childhoods and paradises lost.
I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I kept the faith.
Creation, my beloved true seekers, like William Blake said, is what we do. It is our greatest weapon, or at the very least, the weapon we can turn against the God of this world. Creation is that important element of any gnosis, to visualize, contemplate, and stimulate our lower mind, so that it can commune with our higher mind, our daemon, or the mind of Christ, as St. Paul called it. I've certainly offered plenty of palaver on the importance of creativity in our Stepford idiocratic civilization.
Every passing day, we are taking one step closer to a dictatorship. And we don't even know who the real dictators are.
What I do know is that in Gnostic mythos, as the perfect mind of the alien god creates and imagines, so must we. Our art, our invention, is what truly breaks the bonds of hamarmony or fate, castrates the lust our counterfeit spigot has over us. We are all serfs of our culture, our parents, our social covenants. We are all slaves to a civilization that craves our individuality like a vampire craves a used tampon.
Ha, ha, ooh, he, ha, ha. And I thought my jokes were bad.
But our art, that is special. That is what is too big to fail in the end. There is nothing special about me, you see, but my novel Stargazer and Heretic, my articles, and my short stories, and my douchebag jokes are unique of me and only me. They are all the flickers of my divine spark, and you as well have that exclusive creation. We cannot change the world, but we can alter reality by creating with abandon, by speculating with savagery. If anything, in art or invention is where we are truly free, even if it's for a short while.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion.
This quote by Eric Davis, an honored guest of Aeon Byte, from his book Nomad Codes, certainly captures my gaffing grandiloquence. The Neoplatonist ascent through the spheres, the Gnostic sudden awakening, the desert monk's rejection of the Elan Vital, is not simply a philosophical error or the mark of patriarchy, but is fired by an intensely lucid yearning of the highest of goals, liberation. We don't need to expiate our crimes, but to discover and remember the way out of a false world created through no fault of our own. And this way out is way out. Gnostic texts crackle with a peculiar energy, an almost sci-fi sensibility of alien gods and supramundane universes of light. Though not the first cosmic dualists, the Gnostics may have been the first spiritual off-worlders.
Welcome to the Revelation Superhighway. We bless, no mess.
I'll bring in the beautiful Philip K. Dick again, who agrees with Eric and me with this quote. We did not fall because of a moral error. We fell because of an intellectual error. That of taking the phenomenal world as real. Therefore, we are morally innocent. It is the Empire in its various disguised polyforms which tell us we have sinned. The Empire never ended.
Why did all the dinosaurs die out?
Because you touch yourself at night.
Again, I can't think of two better guests on our 6th anniversary special than Scott Finch and Errol Icsel. Icarian with sunscreen artists on their own who, despite being fans of Aeon Byte, have bagfuls of red pills for you space oddities. Actually, our exact anniversary was sometime in May, but I was getting over my last bout of insanity and still trying to glue together the pieces of my broken psyche.
Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
So I wasn't ready, or more like I didn't know, if my ad hoc, genetically engineered reality and Halliburton mental state would hold up. But we're here and deeper we will go, along with Orpheus and Alice and the dude who got lost in the Hotel California.
I know we're all pretty small in the big scheme of things, and I suppose the most you can hope for is to make some kind of difference. But what kind of difference have I made? What in the world is better because of me?
We will start with Scott and then sail into Errol's blasphemy. Scott is a Fey painter who has held many impressive exhibitions. His artwork has graced the cover of the Gnostic Journal, My Gospel of Thomas album, and several other mediums. There is no suitable praise I can offer for his graphic novel, A Little World Made Cunningly, a haunting, dreamlike work that is the best reinterpretation of the Gnostic creation myth in many centuries.
Scott, you just don't get it, do you? You don't.
For more information on Scott, please visit alittleworldmadecunningly.tumblr.com. You'll get a nice taste of his august imagery.
Scott!
I do understand that ever since Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, comics became respectable and serious, mostly because some pencilhead critic used the word gritty or noir or something like that. I'm waiting for someone to call Aeon Byte gritty and noir so I can laugh all the way to writing the next RoboCop movie. Yaldabaoth knows that comics have always been a serious pursuit, even before the genius of Frank Kirby. I mean, some of the greatest graphic novelists were the Prophet Mani, William Blake, and Carl Jung, as attested by his Red Book.
Man only has one lifetime, but history can remember you forever.
With both Scott and Errol, we shall delve into the Gnostic themes in rock music and graphic novels, but by no means is it exhaustive. Check out our archive of past shows for even more of the Gnostic and occult ethos in modernity that embraces movies, television, literary endeavors of all kinds, and mucho más. Our guests include some of this era's illustrious, pioneering cultural philosophers, such as Chris Knowles, Petra Mundik, Tessa Dick, Jeff Cripple, Eric Davis, John Allen Simon, and many more.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Why our focus on this? In case you've been too busy looking for Joe Paterno's statue, it's because the Gnostics were as much visionary artists as they were theologians. Again, think of Blake's quote. And Gnosis just transmits better in the Matrix or the Black Iron Prison through the dreamscapes of art and wild myth. Our interviews with Willis Barnstone and Eric Wilson certainly focus on this. Check them out as well. So let us do the interview with Scott D. Finch, not before I quote this poem by John Donne, where Scott got his idea for the title of his graphic novel. It's from Holy Sonnet 5. I am a little world made cunningly, of elements and angelic sprite, but black sin hath betrayed to endless night my world's both parts, and oh, both parts must die.
Hey, we all have these terrible stories to get over, and you...
It's not true. Some of us have great stories, pretty stories that take place at lakes with boats and friends and noodle salad. Just no one in this car, but a lot of people. That's their story. Good times, noodle salad. What makes it so hard is not that you had it bad, but that you're that pissed that so many others had it good.
This is the Aeon Byte interview. We have the pleasure of being joined by Scott D. Finch to discuss his wonderful new graphic novel, A Little World Made Cunningly. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great, Miguel. It's really a pleasure to be on the show. I've enjoyed your show ever since it was Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. You know, it's one of the best things up there in terms of, you know, audio for your earbuds. It's exciting to be here.
It's definitely excited to have you on after all these years of interacting in different places and collaborating on different heresies. Tell us a little bit about your background, Scott, and how it has informed your worldview.
I always grew up interested in the arts. At home, I had this sort of very expansive, creative kind of vibe. But then I found that as I was going off to school, I was in Catholic school environment, and I found that to be a place where I kept expecting to run into spirituality and to learn, I don't know, some kind of more direct experiential relationship with the spiritual side of things, and that never really happened for me. And so it was sort of through the creative arts that I always made that connection. And then when I was in high school, for some strange reason, I found myself in a fundamentalist, charismatic high school, and that was a very different environment. Those people actually were very connected to this experiential side of religion. In fact, they didn't even like the word religion. They thought that was something formulaic, and what they were interested in was this sort of direct experience of speaking in tongues and demonic possession, like this really wild, sort of over-the-top kind of experiential kind of spirituality. And that for me was like the real eye-opener, that there could be something in this realm, and that there was something genuine that could come into a person's life. I found that was a really weird way to get involved with that, because those people also had a lot of strange sort of right-wing ideas, and it was a confusing time, but that was like the opening for me of like there is something here beyond just sort of the mundane world. And so that sort of started me looking into spirituality, so that the way that they knew chapter and verse of the Bible, I wanted to know those things, but I also wanted to know different interpretations of what those scriptures meant, and I also wanted to put them in historical context and in a broader comparative religion context. Through putting out feelers and exploring in that realm, I sort of found my way to Gnosticism over the years by way of Joseph Campbell, and then from him to Carl Jung, and then from Carl Jung to everybody. From Carl Jung, you can go to Joyce, and to he wrote articles on flying saucers and Picasso, and ancient religious figures, everybody. So that was sort of a beginning place for me on that.
Scott, could you tell us some of the individuals who influenced you artistically?
Yeah, for me, as a young artist, the thing that you do is, as soon as you go off to school, is you start to look at other artists. You spend a lot of time in museums or being in Deep South and having little access to that when I was in school. I spent a lot of time in libraries looking at books and glossy magazines and things, and it's very difficult to find the kind of art that I was interested in. I wouldn't have known it then, but I was looking for things sort of related to the tradition of Western esotericism. And there are artists like that worked throughout the 20th century. People like Marcel Duchamp, who was very tapped into the language of alchemy and Western esotericism. And Joseph Beuys is another artist who really thought about the intersection between the material and the spiritual worlds, and he was influenced by Rudolf Steiner and people who'd come before him. Other artists that really interested me when I was very young, the autobiography of Paul Klee was important. Some of the Cubists that talked about the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension seemed to be one of those intersections between the visual art world and the sort of broader thinking about metaphysics that was going on at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century. So folks like that. What I tried to sort of sift through the history of the 20th century looking for was artists who weren't necessarily interested in the formal concerns, the visual or what Marcel Duchamp would call the retinal concerns of art. People that were looking for more than just the idea of design or painting being just about what is on the surface. For some visual artists, especially abstract expressionists, New York school painters that were so prominent after the Second World War, there's this emphasis on where a painting is about the surface, and it's a material object, and that is the beginning and the end of it. And that for me was sort of a limitation. I was looking for things that went another direction from that.
And what about in the genre or medium of graphic novels? Are there any graphic novels that influence you or have strong esoteric themes, or said something like, hey, Scott, you can do it too?
You know what? When I first read a few graphic novels that did have those kind of themes in them, I never thought, hey, Scott, you can do this too. I thought, this is amazing. I never thought that this medium could do anything like this. And in fact, one of the first things that I had recommended to me was Grant Morrison's The Invisibles. And if you know anything about that series of books, I just have the trades, the collected works. If you know anything about that, for instance, the folks who made the Matrix, they kept the Invisibles with them on set at all times throughout the making of all of those movies. It was highly influential to them. And to me, the idea of layering the sort of stock imagery of comic books with these different levels of ideas and things that sort of broke off from traditional narrative and that give you a sense of things happening at different levels of reality. So much of what happened in those books really impressed me. And then, of course, I found Alan Moore and a series like Promethea, which is a place where I would tell anybody to start. But I never thought when I was looking at those things that this was something that I could do. The thing that kind of maybe started me thinking about that was I heard that R. Crumb's book of Genesis was coming out. And I thought, well, this will be exciting to see what he does with that, to see how he interprets that. And just slightly before that, Jung's Red Book had come out. And I knew that was going to be full of paintings, and I was hoping that some of that imagery would sort of fill this space that I was looking at, this idea of, how do we get these ideas across visually that are so important? And neither of those books really did what I had hoped that they were going to do for me. Not that they weren't brilliant books, but I sort of thought that Arcrum would take. I know he has sort of Gnostic leanings, so I'd hoped that he would take or interpret that in that sort of direction. And his idea was to make it as literal and as true, just as a fundamentalist might expect it to be, just to sort of let its own absurdity sort of show itself, that this can't be read. Right. This is not something that you want to read literally. If you read it literally, if you draw it very, very literally, it breaks down. And that was an amazing thing that he did, but it wasn't the thing that I wanted to see when I looked at the creation myth. I wanted to see those deep, complex, layered, almost at times more poetic and even like at points impenetrable, because they go back so close to that singularity at the beginning of time that's wordless. I wanted to see all of that there. And when those books weren't quite giving me what I wanted, I think at that point that dissatisfaction sort of started sinking in. I found that I was making paintings of cosmograms. Cosmograms are sort of total pictures of everything, pictures of everything from God above the heavens all the way down to the smallest particle on the earth, and everything in between. I started making a lot of paintings on this subject and sort of ruminating on how to make something that sort of lays out the shape and form of the universe in Gnostic terms. And then the thing that happened was, at some point, I think, without me really realizing it, temporal aspect just sort of forced its way in on me. Like, you can't make this picture without setting it in time. And as soon as that happened, that's when the graphic novel sort of broke in on me. And it was certainly not something I was looking to do, because my own work as a painter, at that point, I had gotten so far away from hand drawing things. I was so dependent upon photographs, imagery, and projectors for drawing things that needed to be carefully drawn. And I had taken a lot of my own hand out of the work. And the idea of doing this thing just seemed impossible. But at the same time, when it showed up, it sort of demanded itself to be made. So I followed.
And Scott, was there any specific Gnostic myth or Gnostic school of thought that you decided to take, or did you decide it sort of like Stephen Heller and I think it's the Gnostic Young, where you sort of tie it in together?
I've never really been a person who sort of parses out schools and says, well, this belongs in this camp and this belongs, and I'm going to find myself in a camp too. I always look at sort of the poetry of imagery. That's the thing that drew me to the Nag Hammadi and brings me back to opening my Bentley Leighton book and reading those scriptures again and again. It's just little bits of imagery. But I think that what I've come to learn is that the things that got picked out to make this story largely align with the sort of Sethian mythos, but that's not, it wasn't ever an intentional thing. I was sort of obsessed with and drawing and writing about the demiurge and thinking about my own creative process as being like the making of a demiurge, because I found that what I was making so often in my own work was this sort of ignorant creation. You go about your work, you feel puffed up, you feel just like the supreme creator, and what you're going to do is going to be genius, and you say to yourself, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before, right? I've been doing this for 15, 16 years since I'm out of school. I know where I'm going. I've hung so many shows. This is going to be great. I have a vision, and so it shall be. And what would end up coming out of that is I would make these paintings that were sort of formally functional, but they were inert. They didn't have the spirit in them. And that would always come from me just sort of surrendering, giving up. It would come at the point when I would say, "Oh, I don't have it. I do not remember. I've completely forgotten what it is that puts life into a painting." And then at that surrender moment is when grace comes in, when something else is able to sort of find its way in. So you stop believing in that ego, in that demiurge, in that position. You give that up, and that's when that breath of life comes in. So this has been a theme going through my work in drawings and in paintings for a long time, sort of leading up to this. I think that's what the book inevitably started out as a sort of response to my own understanding of the creative process, my own creation story, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. The lines between the fiction and the creator are blurred, which of course is very Gnostic in itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you invest so much time in the work, and oftentimes I find that the work is sort of pulling me along by my tail. I have an idea of where I'm going. I think I know what I'm doing, but in fact, I haven't the slightest idea until the thing sort of finds its way, and then I can look back and say, "Oh, that's what you were doing all along." I've been making it. I've been sort of recording what I'm picking up, little hints that I'm getting. I think I have an idea of the scheme of things, but it's not until it presents itself that it really has, until it's already informed that I have any kind of grasp of what it was about. And that was definitely the case with that book, A Little World Made Cunningly. It showed up. It was in an outlined form, sort of in my head one morning, and I said, "I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know what this is, but I guess it has to be made somehow."
Scott, could you tell us about the title?
The title comes from a poem by John Donne, and as I was writing and drawing the book, I kept thinking that there needed to be some kind of a shell story, a frame around it, and that's what the first and last chapters of the book came out to be. I had some idea of sort of everything that was happening in the central story, but it seemed like I needed to sort of encapsulate it somehow. And that poem just sort of fell into my lap. I don't know if you have this, but I feel like sometimes I have a little sort of library angel that when I'm looking for something, it's there. Like if when you're sort of working on a thing and the mind is prepared, things just fall into place. So that's how I came across this. I guess it's like if you don't think about a particular kind of car or something until you've bought one, and then you see them everywhere, kind of thing. So this poem just showed up, and the first half of it, or first section of it, seemed so apt of a description of this kind of two-sided world that the whole book is based on. So that's where that came from. And then the second half fits very nicely to the kind of resolution that the book finds at the end. Yeah, I would recommend it to anyone, and John Donne is an amazing poet. Definitely something that your listeners would identify with, I would think.
And without giving too much of the plot away, could you tell the listener a little bit about A Little World Made Cunningly?
The story starts with a kind of a dark night of the soul. If you think about St. John of the Cross's idea of the soul sort of slipping out of the body and going out to meet the beloved, and that kind of encounter. And at the beginning of the story, there at the protagonist, she sort of slips out of her house into a sort of magical night called by some kind of a call. And once she finds her way to that place where that voice is, it instructs her in the making of of a dress which she weaves, and she weaves it out of Mobius strips. So this one-sided strip. So you take a piece of paper, a long skinny sheet of paper, you twist it once and you connect the two ends, and then if you draw a line, you just keep drawing, even though you had a two-sided sheet of paper, you end up having drawn on what you would have thought of as both sides and all the way back to where you started again if you just draw that line all the way around. And you find that in fact a thing that used to have two sides now has one side. And so she's making this dress out of these one-sided long strips of leaves that she plucks from the trees in this place where she ends up. But one of them, the last one, she sort of decides she's going to gild the lily a bit. She's going to gussy up the dress a bit more according to her own plan rather than following that very sure and true voice. And at that point, the thing falls apart. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's sort of
the fall of Sophia right there. And I'm sure the listeners want to know who gets to play the very juicy role of the demiurge.
The demiurge is this little fellow who is on one side of this broken piece of leaf that had been a Mobius strip, and he sort of wakes up thinking that he is the only person anywhere, and he wakes up on the underside of this leaf in total darkness, surrounded by the chaos, which is the blades of grass sort of pushing up against the leaf all around him, and he just thinks of himself as this sole lone creature in a vast chaotic darkness, and it's going to be his job to sort of get things organized and make something out of this sort of dim, lousy place. And so he populates a world, and that world that he populates, of course, gets away from him and goes in directions that he can't anticipate. And that's sort of where the story gets off and running.
Yeah, there's a very almost a fairy tale quality to it, a dreamlike haunting place. Do you think it's something that children might be able to read, or is it more for the lost baby Jesus in each one of us?
I tell you, my children aren't going to read it because I wrote it, so that doesn't interest them at all. I don't know. I think it's a thing that works best if you're maybe a bit older and open to the idea of things not being entirely concrete, looking at things on different levels. And somebody who has a little bit of initiation into mystical writings or Gnostic writings, that's gonna help, but it's definitely not necessary. I think that definitely young kids, though, even though it has a sort of fable-like quality to it, may not quite strike them. But I would think by the time a person hits early teens or something like that, you sort of have those inklings in mind.
And it has been well received by certain people like Andrew Phillips Smith and Stephen Davis and other scholars of Gnosticism and ancient religions. So you definitely executed what you needed to execute.
Yeah, I'm very happy to get some good feedback. I tried sharing it with some people that I hoped would sort of connect with what I was doing, just as a way of getting feedback to know if what I was putting down was actually making it across. And having people like Dr. Stephen Davies and Andrew Phillips Smith and Jeremy Puma and yourself sort of give me that good feedback, that was really important for me because, like I said, this is not an area where I've had a lot of experience, but it was a thing that had a certain momentum of its own, and I was just really glad that it was that I did get that good feedback as I was working on it. I really appreciate that.
Moving on to a little broader thing, and this is something I love to ask many of my guests. What is a short or shortest answer you give when someone asks you, and you are in the middle of Jimmy Swaggart country, about what is Gnosticism, and to you, what is Gnosis?
Surprisingly, not too many people ask me that, Miguel, in the middle of Jimmy Swaggart land. But those are some slippery words, because for me, Gnosticism, it seems to be any kind of paper bag or cardboard box or mousetrap that somebody can try to use to contain whatever their definition of Gnosticism. It's their way of containing Gnosis, and there's so many little schools and different opinions on the subject that the term Gnosticism is a real tricky one. I'm sure for you, you've heard plenty of different definitions of that. For me, Gnosis is not quite so tricky of a word, but it's a word kind of like love, where if you ask for a definition, you're going to get a different definition from anyone you meet. But if you hear it used in a context, it sort of has more of a real sense to it. But for me, I guess Gnosis is that kind of acquaintance with the spirit. It's a kind of, for me, it's a kind of certainty that keeps growing inside of me. It's the certainty that keeps sort of leading me towards the life of the spirit. It's a kind of certainty that it seems to be drawing me in. I work by reading, by meditating, by making my art to move in that direction. But at the same time, I feel it's this thing that pulls me toward the life of the spirit.
It seems like me, or what I agree with, and Willis Barnstone certainly agreed with, and you could probably go back to the Classic Gnostics, the Neoplatonists, and take it further to William Blake, but it seems like perhaps one of the main ingredients of Gnosis is imagination, that shifting of images that you find in the Gospel of Philip. That's that creative spark within us.
It's true. I mean, when you read those texts, those tracts and Gospels, that's the thing that compelled me from the start. It is the kind of surprising imagery, and often very visual surprising imagery. In fact, at the beginning of what I would call the period of my art that is heavily involved with study of what they call Gnosticism, it was just looking through those texts, and rather than get swept up in them and get lost as one after another and another of these overwhelming metaphorical images sort of took me over. I have trouble comes after another, like in the Gospel of Philip or Gospel of Truth. So what I did is to slow those down, and I would take a small piece of it, and I would make a painting, and I would fill a notebook just on a few verses, one image, just to give myself the kind of time that I need to think about things. I know in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, I think that I've heard that the particularly lousy monks who can't hold any kind of attention, they have no focus at all, they give them the job of making those fan paintings, because it's a way of sort of fixing the mind and giving yourself a task to hold your attention in one place. I think for me, that visual imagery is a way of sort of working those things out.
Yeah, certainly, because even in Shintoism and in Manichaeanism, painting was a big part of the spiritual pursuit.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the art in Manichaeanism, and also, I'm going to mispronounce this on your show because there are too many vowels, but what do you call it? Mandaism?
Mandeanism? Yeah, now you're making me do it. The Mandeans.
What I wanted to say about the Mandeans it was simply that there's so much of that kind of visual imagery in the text that sometimes it's more drawing than it is writing. It's really beautiful work, and oftentimes you see it in pottery as well. But tremendously beautiful work there too.
Of course, when you read something like the Trimorphic Pretenoia or Thunder of the Perfect Mind, you go, wow, this is evocative poetry.
There are people too, later on, people like William Blake, that you can see there's just, at some point, the words require pictures. There's just no other way to sort of bridge that gap and communicate what's going on inside of him. You know, that's another great source of beautiful imagery. I also am really fond of the prints of Robert Flood and some of those other.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah. You know, there are so many, there's so many sort of condensed and visual form to those complex abstract ideas that you find in the text. You know, I love that.
And before we go, Scott, is there any advice you would give to any artists out there who is sort of trying to break through, or trying to come find his voice or find his muse, if you would?
The only thing that I would say about that is to get out of your own way. That voice is there. It's waiting for you to shut up and pay attention to it. You know, I find that so often it's my own sort of grasping, my own intellectual chatter, my own desire to make things happen that get in the way of me actually receiving that voice that's sort of waiting. It's a patient voice. It's always there. It's always ready to go if you can find a way to shut up and pay attention to it.
Exactly. Don't try to be Sophia creating everything on your own, or the Demiurge, even though they get the best roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Scott. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing your new graphic novel, A Little World Made Cunningly.
Thank you, Miguel. It was a real pleasure.
Now you will see me one more time if you do good. You'll see me 2 more times if you do bad.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Scott Finch on a galvanizing interview on Gnosis and his graphic novel, A Little World Made Cunningly. For more information on Scott, please visit alittleworldmadecunningly.tumblr.com. You'll get a nice taste of his August imagery.
I like animals. Maybe I'd be a vet.
An evil vet?
No. Maybe like work in a petting zoo.
An evil petting zoo?
You always do that!
Now we move on to the second part of our show on Gnostic themes in rock music and graphic novels, as well as a celebration on how the Archons have allowed Aeon Byte to thrive after 6 years. Maybe it's because of my long-term affair with the Demiurge's wife, Agnoia or Ignorance, and how I might expose their tyrannical relationship.
I am the Supreme Being. I'm not entirely dim.
Anywho, we have another interview with a friend and fan of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, Errol Icsel, who will be discussing the liberating heresy found in rock music, as well as his masterly band, Sylvia Bliss. For more information on Errol and Sylvia Bliss, please visit sylviablissband.com.
I do not for one think that the problem was that the band was down. I think that the problem may have been that there was a Stonehenge monument on the stage that was in danger of being crushed by a dwarf. Alright? That tended to understate the hugeness of the object.
Errol is the son of a Kemalist Muslim, while his mother is a Roman Catholic. His grandfather was a 32nd degree Mason and commander in the Turkish Navy. He took the name Icsel, which means inner mystic or mysticism. That certainly paved the road to Errol untapping the wells of Gnosis. One of his great influences is Peter Seinfeld, the lyricist of both King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Errol is a member of a Hermetic order and recently made a bishop of a church he will mention in the interview, and we hope to do a future interview on.
You spend too much time in your codes. The beast and his false prophet get cast out into the lake of fire.
Fairy tales.
As mentioned, Aeon Byte is a big influence on him. Don't know why, as well as the works of Jan Irving, Andrew Rudajit, Eric Wilson, Arthur Versluis, and Stephen Hewler. Certainly check out his band's 2 albums, Toad's Tongues and Arsenic, and Muse of Fire. A truly unique and ethereal sound without apologies and without orthodoxy. Their song El Dorado is one of my all-time favorites, as attested by how many times a week I play it.
Toughened your nipples, didn't it?
Before we go, please allow me to recite the inspiration for Muse of Fire, found in Shakespeare's Henry V. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princess to act, and monarchs to behold a swelling scene. But enough of my drivel. Errol, Icsel, and some of Sylvia Bliss's tunes afterwards. Hello and goodbye as always.
The quest is to be liberated from the negative, which is really our own will to nothingness. And once having said yes to the instant, the affirmation is contagious. It bursts into a chain of affirmations that knows no limit. To say yes to one instant is to say yes to all of existence.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by an artist, a Gnostic, and a friend of mine, Errol Icsel, to discuss his band Sylvia Bliss and other heretical sundries. How are you doing today, Errol?
I'm doing great.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us again. Tell us a bit about your background or your path to Gnosis and how you came into being, or how you came to being a full-blown heretic.
It wasn't hard. I grew up in Texas. It's like what Bill Hicks said about dinosaur fossils, and I grew up with all those crazy explanations for everything, all the stuff you might see on Landover Baptist or whatever. I was like, wait a second. I don't understand this story here. I remember when I was as young as believing in that storks delivered babies, people were always going on about, gays and things like that. And I was like, I got to where I didn't even believe that they existed. That's how bad it was. I was like, you're just making that up. I'll file that under the Easter Bunny, and well, actually, I kind of believe in Santa Claus now, so I'm getting as far as that goes. No, it was just kind of growing up in that real kind of religious South. It was kind of openly racist back then, and we're talking about the 70s. People didn't hold back. I would say my path to Gnosis really began in March 25th of 1978. I was baptized, I believe it was a Easter Vigil, and they gave me a Bible, and they gave me a book of, like a prayer book, and it was a long prayer book, and I was like, do I have to memorize all this? It was a Catholic baptismal, as you can imagine. And I started going through it. Here I am, I'm going through puberty at the same time, which kind of led me to wonder, did they get me to do this because, I was doing things I didn't know I was doing? I looked at the prayer book, and of course, everything is like, if you have naughty thoughts about a neighbor, say this prayer, and if you masturbate on a Thursday, you say this prayer, or, it was kind of ridiculous. And so I said, well, I'm going to read the Bible. I'm finally going to sit down and read it. And pretty much when I was reading, I was like, are you kidding me? How does this is Jesus' daddy here? This guy, I had that Marcionite moment. And ironically, my brother was having that Marcionite moment too. This was back in the Carol Burnett tough love days. They put my brother in a rehab, and he really shouldn't have been there. He thinks he's an addict, and he's not. Nevertheless, they got him in the usual 12-step thing where you got to give your life to God and all this. So they got him reading the Bible, and he comes back and goes, hey man, this Old Testament and this New Testament doesn't square up. And I said, you notice that too? We were both kind of having that Gnostic moment. I went kind of beyond that. I started off, I read Genesis. To me, it was like, man, these people are apes. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And I was like, they totally whitewashed the Noah story. Because when you're a kid, they kind of tell the Noah story. They make it sound like, a flood's coming. And God was very nice to Noah and gave him a heads up. It's only when you read it and you go, oh, wait a second, it was God that did that. Oh, that wasn't very nice. And it was kind of the same thing with the story of David. You know, they tell you that David killed Goliath with a rock. They don't tell you that he knocked him out and then went and cut his head off. You talk about rewriting the Bible or reinterpreting the Bible. People were doing that. People were doing that to me. And I was like, hey, that story you told me, that's not how it went. That's not how I'm reading it over here. As I was going through the book of Genesis, I noticed that God didn't seem omnipotent. I didn't buy into, say, Genesis 3:9, Adam, where are you? I didn't take that as a rhetorical question. I took that as he didn't know. God is asking Adam where he is. I took that literally, which is the thing they don't want you to do, right? They don't want you to take the Bible literally.
Yeah, exactly. Only when they want to.
And then when you get to the Noah story, it starts off with God repented that he had created man. It's like, oh, so he screwed up is what it's saying there. You know, oh man, I should never have done this. Some of my favorite verses in the Old Testament are the ones that have the word dash in it. I can go to Bible Gateway and plug in dash, and I'll find, blessed is he who dasheth his little ones against the stone. Dash your babies against the stones, and I'm going to rip out the babies from your bellies. Like, I think God's against abortion. It doesn't seem like baby killing he has any problem with that. My path to Gnosis began first with kind of looking at the Bible literally, kind of as they were kind of telling me to do, and I didn't have, if you will, the benefit of somebody standing over my shoulder spewing apologetics into my ear. I just read the book. By the time I got to Psalms, I started to realize that this book was kind of like an incantation, that there was other meanings going on. There was something else going on beneath the surface. It's like you say in your show, you know, you read the Old Testament literally, forget that line that you know.
If you take the Old Testament literally, you'll be deemed a criminal. If you take the New Testament literally, you'll be deemed insane. The second part is fine. I don't mind that one. That's
kind of where I got to. I got to realizing that, oh, wait a second, I'm not supposed to take this like a historical document. I'm just supposed to get out of it whatever I get out of it. And I tell my wife all the time, I say, hey, you get into one of them Bible quoting fights with somebody, just go back to the letter killeth and the spirit giveth life, because really that's what it all comes down to. That right there tells you, hey, you need to take this Bible with a grain of salt. Even I think the Jews understood that. Hence all the midrash, by the way.
Exactly, and that's what the Gnostics did. So tell us, Errol, how did you first encounter the Gnostics?
You, actually.
Wow.
I was having it was really interesting, Miguel. All these books were coming out, you know, God is Not Great, and you know, Dawkins and Harris, and they were it seemed like all of a sudden there was like this atheist uprising that was going on in the blogosphere. I wanted to get in on it, so I started blogging. But I wasn't doing it like they were doing it. I was quoting horrifying Bible quotes. This is basically what I did. I would get into Bible quote fights. Basically, they would quote something, and it was always the same cheerful, the same quotes. It's like, I think a lot of people who call themselves Christian have never read the Bible. You know, they've never actually sat down and given it much thought. They just know what their pastors have told them. They don't have that benefit. One of the things that I noticed that the atheists were doing at that time, this is what, 2005 or 2006? You know, first off, they came out with that, we had this new parody religion that came out, which was the Lying Spaghetti Monster. That book borrows from the Bible. They have, you know, Musa, the pirate, that's Moses, and Midget Adam. And I started talking to this lady, Kylie. She was a friend of mine, full Gnosis. In fact, the one that made me a bishop. She's part of the Gnostic Universalis with Alan Greenfield. And she said, don't be an atheist, is what she told me. And I said, okay, then I'm going to be a Gnostic. Yeah, I didn't know what a Gnostic was. I already had Gnosis. I didn't even get around to the Nag Hammadi by then. I just knew that there was no way, I had that Marcionite moment already, and I already had I had the spiritual experiences. At one time, I kind of knew the Hebrew alphabet. I don't really know it now. It got me, I realized, okay, yeah, I've met atheists, and they seem like born atheists, and I'm probably not, I'm not built like them. I have a very inquisitive mind, and a very, I just want to, I kind of want to know what people are thinking. I kind of want to know what the ideas are that are out there. And that's kind of when I found your show. One of the things that I noticed that atheists were doing was they were kind of making arguments. In fact, the Christian apologists were saying that's an old argument. And it was an old argument because it was a lot of Gnostic arguments. Basically, these surrounded what they called unintelligent design or stupid design or what the flying spaghetti monster, the Pastafarians call drunken design. In other words, that the universe isn't designed very well. They would talk about the human heart. There's one coronary artery, but you might need 8 bypasses by the time you're 50 because the human heart is basically no different than a fish's heart. The rabbit, if the universe is 6,000 years old, and rabbits didn't descend from a predator, why did God make it basically poop out its food and then re-eat it,
Yeah. Or why we have this terrible blind spot that has put us in the mouth of saber-toothed tiger so many times.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the human eye, that's another one. That's like we view it in a very narrow spectrum. It'd be nice if we could, see in the ultraviolet light or other spectrums of light, if we could see sound or other dimensions that coexist with our own. But we're not necessarily, we know that other creatures have very acute vision, so the human eye isn't necessarily, it could be better. Let's just
much better, yes. Everything could be better.
Yeah, the male nipple argument, that was one I kept hearing, and I was like going, well, wait a second, I got a better one than the male nipple argument. Of course, Christians say that God hates homos, getting back to the homo thing, or the gay thing, rather. And yet, I found out that guy was telling me about the prostatic utricle, which is a G-spot that's basically in the anus of the male. So it's like, if God hates gays, then why does he stick a G-spot?
Satan did it.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I love that one. There was on the human heart argument, there was actually a guy that an evangelical or somebody, some religious leader was making the argument that God created the human heart so that man could invent bypass surgery.
Okay.
That was the funniest thing I heard. That was in a movie I bought called A Flock of Dodos. It's really good because it really kind of doesn't take sides. 85% of fertilized eggs don't make it up to its proper place. They basically are aborted. There's ectopic pregnancies. Your buddy Richard Carrier makes the point of 1/5 of women without modern medicine would die because children have fat heads, essentially. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, he talked about our entertainment center and our sewage system being the same. Why isn't that separated? And he also brings up a very good point about us basically choking. We eat, drink, talk, and breathe through one. It kind of all comes through one path.
Very practical.
Yeah, maybe you could have separated what we eat and drink with from what we breathe through, so there wouldn't be so much choking. I found all these arguments great, but I thought these were Gnostic arguments, not really good atheist arguments, because if you don't believe that there's a designer or a fashioner of some sort, then why even make the argument? To me, it's like you're arguing our point. By this point, I was on the Gnostic bandwagon, and I was like, hey, the atheists are arguing all our points. They're doing all our work for us. But these weren't new arguments. These were things like the Gnostics. They may not have been going through this list that I just went through, but they were discussing, hey, look, man, this planet, this whole thing wasn't set up very good. Probably when Vesuvius exploded, they really thought, hey, you know what, this isn't very good. So somebody could have done a better job.
But tell us, Errol, through your arc of Gnosis, what are some of your spiritual and artistic influences?
As far as fiction writers, Michael Moorcock, I love this stuff. The whole thing of law and chaos. Of course, I never got around to any of his books where, law was kind of the bad guy, but it was definitely out there. It was that you get around to the Elric character, and he's serving a Ariok of chaos, and is like, oh, well, this is kind of a neat twist. The anti-hero to me is I just love the anti-hero. That whenever I would hear, oh, this movie has an anti-hero, I'd go, oh, I got to see that movie then. Fistful of dollars, the good, the bad, the ugly, that kind of thing.
I agree with you, because obviously the Gnostics were or have been the perennial anti-heroes. And going back to Moorcock, for me, his story, Behold a Man, really got my whatever engine or divine spark going.
Yeah, and you know what? He used that same character for a book called Breakfast in the Ruins.
Yeah, great book.
That, to me, that is a great book. To me, you got to read both. You can't just stop at one. You got to read Breakfast in the Ruins. That book had a profound effect on me. That really did. Because to me, that just showed the horror of life. And I felt like the character was his eternal champion character. There's some debate about that in the Moorcock world, but I just was feeling so much for that character who himself, people isn't always painted in a sympathetic way, but you're just feeling all that human tragedy, and you're going, oh God, and you realize this is kind of how it is. I led a very sheltered life here in the suburbs of Texas.
It's all out there, and Texas does have everything if you really look for it. So somebody who lived there, I know that, well, it's a fascinating place, almost a microcosm of our universe.
It really is. We've got everything here. They put on plays and operas here. We're the fourth largest city, and we got mega churches like you would not believe. But we also have a space center here. It's almost like a total contradiction. I mean, we have an oil industry here, and yet people think the Earth is 6,000 years old. Because even at a young age, you kind of knew that oil came from rock layers and all that. When I went to college, I took a class in geomorphology, and I was like, well, that kind of ruined any idea of a young Earth to me. It wasn't going to happen. I took two geology classes and a geomorphology class, and I was like, okay, young Earth theory, you might as well just pack your bags. It just isn't happening. As far as my artistic other influences, not of a musical nature, I was a Star Trek fan, and I see a demiurge character particularly in an episode called The Squire of Gothos. To me, that guy was it's like there was some Gnosis going on, not just on The Prisoner, but in the Twilight Zone there was an episode. It's a famous one. It's the one with the little kid that wishes people away to the cornfield. Remember that?
Oh yeah. It was in the remake too.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, they remade another episode in which a guy. Talk about sci-fi. Here's one where a guy basically, the scene opens and he's in a courtroom and he's just been convicted of murder. And then basically it ends with him being executed, and then it's basically Groundhog Day. And he's basically telling everybody, hey, look, when I die, the universe ends. But the day just keeps repeating, and finally people start, because he's lived through that day so many times, he's able to tell them, enough information to where they're like, they believe him. But they don't seem to be able to stop that little roller coaster ride they're on. That, to me, that was a real good precursor, if you will, to to the movie that came later. And I believe that was called The Box, Richard Matheson, or no, that's not The Box. It's the same author. Same author, though.
I think for me it was definitely when Q was introduced to the Star Trek mythos and made me go, oh my God, if God is omnipotent, what would he do with all this power? Oh yeah, it happened.
Yeah, exactly. And there, without walking in our shoes, so to speak, he doesn't necessarily have a clue of who he's dealing with or what he's dealing with. I mean, with all his knowledge and everything, there's still something he doesn't know. There's still some gap.
There's going to be some unhingement. Going to your band, Sylvia Bliss, can you tell us about its founding and how it came to being?
I need to kind of go back to your previous question.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
If you've ever seen like a child prodigy they play an instrument really good at a very young age, nobody ever asks them what got you interested in music, because that's the question I always wanted to know. I was no child prodigy. I never learned to read music or, had any like innate skill right off the bat. I just had a love for hard rock and heavy metal and progressive rock at a very young age. I was listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer when Brain Salad Surgery came out, and I must have been 6 or 7 years old. You tell that to people and they're like, no way. And I'm like, no, yes. I had an older brother and he had all those albums and I listened to them more than he did. I would experience kind of an altered state of consciousness just listening to other people's music, to just listening to that music. And when I picked up the guitar at 8, I was 8 years old when I started playing. I started playing in bands in my early teens. When I was a junior in high school, I put a band together with 2 other guys. We were a power trio, and we were really good. We were playing some of my songs, and I would experience it was nice to finally experience that altered state. It was a euphoric state of, I don't know how to describe it. Just playing music, and sometimes it would be improv. We would just make stuff kind of off the cuff. We might have a structure like, okay, this is the song, but do whatever you want, kind of a thing. We were always kind of into that improv thing, and it was like, oh, that's a really good look. Try to remember that next time we play this. Hey, you remember when you did that one part? Play that again. Do that again next time. That really was good. To me, music itself was a spiritual experience. You don't even realize that you're just grinning. You got a huge grin on your face while you're playing with these other people, and you realize how good they've gotten it at their instrument or at playing that particular song. My first band we went by the name Ice Princess. I always kind of went for kind of female type names for some reason, kind of like naming your ship. Star Trek, I guess, calling it a she. I'd refer to the band as a she. I went off to college, Southwest Texas State, now called Texas State, and put a band together there. And I met a guy named Rob Carranza. He's got a band. He's got music out. He almost got signed. Rob introduced me to Mike Babineau. Mike lived in Houston. Rob was from Houston. I was from Houston. We all moved back to Houston and ended up in a band together. So I basically ended up in a band, and I was basically playing their music. I never actually got around to kind of putting my little stamp on some of the songs that they already had, but Rob and I wrote 2 songs before it disbanded. But at the same time, I put a band together with a guy named James Allen Brown, who's basically the other half of Sylvia Bliss. Me and James we've been kind of a team going back to, say, 86, when I was about 19 is when I met him. And what was real interesting about James was he would play jazz chords. He'd play weird. He was not a rock guitar player. He wanted to play rock and roll, but he was like a cross between Robert Fripp and geez, I don't know who. Just
when I listen to your band, for some reason, King Crimson always jumps out at me, or it's the closest I can get.
I'm glad you say that because people always say y'all sound like Rush, but I've been putting our music out there and nobody says that. Only my friends say we sound like Rush. Everybody else says y'all got a bit of a King Crimson thing working, and I was like, yeah, that was intentional. And I say that it was intentional was because of we had that love of kind of that old avant-garde stuff that was going on. Fripp and Eno, Laurie Anderson, Steve Reich, Ken Nordine. You know, you've probably never heard of half of these people. We had a love for this kind of music. Basically, I had a Marshall stack. It would catch on fire, and I hated it. And of course, here in Texas, if you play a solid state amp, which the guys in King Crimson did, that was like committing heresy. I'm not kidding. Here, if you're not playing a Fender Twin or something along those lines, if you're not playing a Stratocaster, you can get in trouble. And I didn't play either one. I saw King Crimson, Three of a Perfect Pair, and I immediately got rid of my Marshall, bought a JC 120, which is what they play, and convinced James to do the same. So we dueling 120s. And for some reason, we get completely different sounds. I don't know what it is. Having the same type of rig, we still don't sound anything like each other. I'm still kind of a grungy hard rock kind of a guy, and he's a kind of a jazz kind of a guy. And that's where I think that King Crimson sound kind of comes from. It's the amp sound, and it's also it's the influence. And we weren't really used to playing dual guitars. We played in bands. We were the only guitar player in the bands we were there. So when we got together, we started writing music, and it was like, okay, unlike other bands like, say, Judas Priest or Thin Lizzy, we don't play the same thing. Let's contradictory thing to what you're doing, and that's kind of part of the writing process.
But what are some of the themes you decided to take on or use in your CDs, Toads, Tongues, and Arsenic, and Muse of Fire?
One thing is we always started out with what was basically an instrumental. The music almost always came first. I didn't like that. I didn't want to be an instrumental band. You do 12 of a riff, man. You need to throw something out there, something catchy or something. Oh, man, we got to have some singing or something. The first song we wrote was Muse of Fire. And for the longest time, we knew it was like our signature song, but we had no words. I would say that the lyrics are very, I would always try to keep them abstract, like this can mean whatever you want it to mean. It might have meant one or two things to me. In other words, I didn't want to beat somebody over the head and say, oh, this is a song about corruption in Congo, or this is a song about apartheid.
Or this is the Gospel of Thomas. I'm going to sing about the Gospel of Thomas, and it's obvious it's a Gospel of Thomas, and that's it.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just kind of paint a canvas with words. And it's like, well, am I a poet? I tried to be. I think I achieved that with True Friends. I think the words on that song are really good. That song is a bit obvious about what it's about. Or is it? I don't know what people take from that song. I don't know what they interpret from it. What I was trying to get across was we're all of different minds, and when you have friendships, you're not always going to agree with each other. Sometimes you have friends and you have these falling outs, and you're like, why are we having a falling out? Just because we didn't agree with something. Well, I guess this friendship wasn't meant to be, and that's kind of what the song is about. It's about, hey, some friends can overlook all your crap, and some friends can't. You kind of hope that if they can't overlook it from the start, run away now, hit the road. There's probably not a lot of Gnostic in the tradition, like with Fields of Elysium. I borrow a lot of mythology, but I'm not writing about mythology. I'm more or less kind of creating whatever. I'm just kind of letting the words come out. You're just waiting for the inspiration. I wrote 2 or 3 versions for Muse of Fire. posted it on YouTube. I posted the songs out there. Musifier, Sylvia Bliss, Musifier. And I posted the original poem that he wrote. And if you try to follow it with the song, you'll be out of luck, because it's the poem that I posted. And you can see how I basically extracted a song out of it. I was inspired. I basically took my inspiration from what he wrote. I didn't want it to go to waste because the poem didn't work. The poem flat out didn't work. And I said, but there's good stuff here. And his stuff had a very, talk about Muse of Fire. He was really rocking the Shakespeare on that particular tune. Very inspired by, the opening prologue to Henry V. He didn't have that line in the song, but I was like, that line is so beautiful, that opening sentence. I said, that's got to be in the song. And really it captures the essence of what the song was. It was the struggle to find a statement that expressed what we struggled to achieve with that song, which was to find the right words to go with the song. Find the right, what were we trying to convey as a band? What were we trying to convey in our music? That line really captures the essence of that song and probably everything else we've written. I had to be in there. And then, of course, there's El Dorado, which I noticed.
I love that song. One of my favorites.
That was James. That was completely James's idea, and it fit our tone so well. It was open to interpretation for one thing, but clearly the song has that kind of sense of regret, sense of misplaced values, if you will. It's very dark. It's a counterpiece kind of to Celebration. We started playing and it was like, yeah, okay, that'll work. And we worked it up and worked out pretty good.
Both CDs, and I recommend to the listener, they are Orphic journeys into some, looking at your life, it's like the Gospel of Thomas. You will be disturbed and you will be amazed.
Oh, yeah. That pretty much, I've experienced that.
And we continue to.
In fact, on the Songburst, after the fact, I wanted to kind of break the song down, and I put these little, this is an epic journey of Orpheus, so I put that. But I didn't think that at the time. I just thought that after the fact. You're playing for 12 minutes, and you're singing, and you're singing. The song is about music itself. It's basically about how music can transcend you. You know what I mean? It can take you to another level.
Yeah, it's a mystery religion or experience in itself. Initiation.
It really is. Within itself, music. I think people who go through their entheogenic initiations, they like to put the Floyd on, or they like to put the Tangerine.
Yeah, to the Wizard of Oz too.
Tangerine Dream, whatever. They like to get into that musical state. They don't necessarily want quiet. Some people want absolute quiet because the music might disturb them. Find something that's kind of soothing. Because I think when you talk about themes, the human condition, I wanted to capture the human condition. And I think my music will always kind of be about that. It'll always be the human equation and what I see as our basically divine truth, personal truth. It's like you say, we're like angels trapped in the carcass of an animal. I definitely have felt that my whole life. And now that I'm getting older and stuff's starting to fall apart, I'm feeling it even more so. I love it when Peyton Oswald, he made a comment about I should have been a pillar of light. When I heard him say that, he was basically talking about the human body. It vibrates. It's a wave like sound. That's kind of how I come to know the truth of existence. It's a movement. It's music. It's light. The limitless light. When people want to get into a discussion about divinity or what God is or whatever, it's like the minute I hear the word God, I think demiurge. But if you want to talk to me about limitless light or nine sulfur, those are the terms I use. A consciousness that emerges from an intense, sizzling light. I've actually experienced it. I've had that moment where I was like, I felt like I was there, and I felt That was the only way I could ever feel a real oneness with people, with humanity in that pantheistic sense, because I don't necessarily buy into any of that New Age philosophy. But if I'm connected to everybody, that's how I feel like I'm connected. I felt like I'm connected to everybody, and really everybody is me. And every time I get into an argument with somebody, I'm actually having an argument with myself. That's kind of my sense of the world. Almost like I'm a reincarnation of everybody else. But I don't believe in reincarnation necessarily.
Well, Errol, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on finally on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio and discussing your Sapience and as well as your band, Sylvia Bliss.
Oh, man, it's been a pleasure.